Hello, and welcome to Targeted Reductions, Minimizing Emissions with Science-Based Targets, a webinar presented to you by Navigant and Gobi. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brian Trainer, and I am part of the Sustainability Consulting team here at Gobi ESG. The session today will be recorded and sent to all participants on today's call. You are welcome to share this session with anyone who you feel may benefit. Today's session will run about 40 minutes in length, and we left time at the end of the presentation for questions. Please feel free to use the chat feature to submit any questions during the presentation. The goal of this webinar is to offer an introductory overview about science-based targets and gain insights into the benefits, advantages, and potential ROI of implementing them within your sustainability strategy. Topics will include what science-based targets mean for your sustainability program, the benefits of science-based targets over other methodologies, methods of calculating your science-based targets, and the best tools and practices for your sector. Joining me today will be Vincent Hoon, Associate Director of Navigant. Vincent serves as North American Corporate Sustainability Manager at Navigant. His expertise include corporate sustainability and carbon reduction strategies, as well as target setting and roadmap development. And I'll let Vincent take it from here.
Thank you very much. Today I'll be talking about the topic of science-based targets, greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and several related topics. Company I work for is called Navigant. We work with major brands and NGOs across the globe in the field of science-based targets and emission reduction strategies. We have offices across the globe in Europe and in most major North American cities. We've been working in the field of energy and climate for the past 30 years. Our team counts over 600 experts, and our clients include corporates, organizations in the financial sector, governments, and heavy industry, among others. So today I'll be talking about that science-based targets topic, but there's a lot of context to this topic, and it kind of started at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is actually the context that developed into the Paris Agreement, and that was a major convention where there was agreement among many countries that carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions needed to be reduced in order to keep temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius. The interesting thing that's happening now is that many countries are committing to reducing emissions, and they're developing plans for this called nationally determined contributions, and there will also be a lot of financing related and involved in this. There's only one problem. All the commitments from countries will not add up to the required emission reductions in order to keep temperature increase to that well below 2 degrees Celsius. So this is a visual of a country climate action tracker Navigant keeps, and as you can see, many countries are not yet acting in line with what is needed to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius or even move to 1.5 degrees. And here's another visual of that, and what you can see here is that current policy projections will lead to increased emissions. Luckily, based on current country pledges, emissions will go down. But still, to stay below that 2 degrees line and even potentially move to 1.5 degrees, a lot needs to happen. And we do see a huge opportunity for companies, any companies and investors to contribute to this context. So there's a gap based on what countries are doing. At the same time, a lot of emissions are industry related. I'll show an industry overview in a bit and what needs to happen. But anyways, there's a huge opportunity for companies who contribute to keeping temperature increase to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius. And then there has been a lot of communication about this topic, especially in the past 2 years. So financial institutions are communicating on the topic. Energy companies, oil and gas industry is being challenged by investors to communicate on the topic and to develop programs. This pressure from investors simply leads to more and more companies setting up programs related to climate change. And one of the more quoted examples is the work BlackRock is doing with this huge investments and also impressive outreach to sectors and companies in asking them to pay attention to not only their emissions, but also reducing their climate risk. So reducing to what extent they are exposed to climate risk, for instance, related to increase of temperatures, extreme weather events, but also the market situation changing and policies. Another interesting fact is that CDP, formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, did research. And what they found is that companies that have a climate change program have an 18% higher return on investments than companies that do not disclose anything on climate. And companies refusing to disclose on climate, they even have a much lower return on investment. The research was not on the reasons why. It is simply showing that successful companies usually also have a well thought through climate strategy, or at least communicating on the topic. So maybe it has something to do with their strategic planning capability. And one thing before going into some of the details of setting science-based targets, I wanted to mention is that there's also a lot of research available on that global warming can cost the corporate sector and the economy in general a lot of money due to more extreme weather events, among others. So based on this context, a lot of communication on the topic, investors looking at this, and also NGOs looking at this. There are a couple of initiatives that really provide a lot of guidance and context in the field of greenhouse gas strategies for companies. One important initiative is the Task Force G20 platform, initiated by Bloomberg, and many companies are part of this initiative now that provide guidance on how to develop your climate-related risk management strategy. I think most of the people today listening in are aware of what the U.S. Green Building Council is doing with its lead projects and initiatives. In the U.S., we're still in is an initiative that got a huge amount of signatories, all saying we're still in and acting in line with the Paris Agreement. Many companies are reporting to CDP on any topic, including climate change. What we also see is that in order to reduce emissions, you can focus on energy efficiency, but something else many companies are focusing on is procuring or developing on-site renewable energy. This is also one of the ways companies can achieve their science-based targets, and two major initiatives North America are REBA, the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance, and RE100. So more and more companies are committing to achieving their goals, partially by focusing on efficiency and also by focusing on renewable energy generation. And kind of the thinking of all these initiatives is integrated in the Science Based Targets initiative. This initiative was initiated by the World Wildlife Fund, again CDP, also WRI, World Resources Institute, and We Mean Business and the United Nations Global Compact about 5 years ago. That was the time when Navigant was hired to develop the sectoral decarbonization approach I'll be talking about. And we started working with the first companies to set science-based targets. So actually, the number of companies that are committing to science-based targets grows every day. Here you see it's 406 companies. I just checked, and by now there are already over 430 companies that have committed to the development of a science-based target. And the initiative has approved little over 100 targets, there's a methodology there are criteria by the Science Based Targets Initiative. So when you develop a science-based target, you can first commit to that you're developing a science-based target, and then the next step is obtaining approval from the Science Based Targets Initiative. So I promised to talk a little bit more about the sectoral decarbonization approach. That's the slide you see here. And the sectoral decarbonization approach is an approach where it's an approach based on IEA modeling. On the left-hand side of this figure, you see here, you see the current emissions, how they've been evolving, and then sector by sector, you can see to what extent a sector needs to decarbonize in order to keep global temperature increase to that maximum of 2 degrees Celsius. And the methodology we developed helps organizations looking at their emissions sector by sector, and then based on a formula that takes into account corporate growth, but also these decarbonization pathways from the IEA in order to see to what extent your activities need to be decarbonized. And once you know your emissions or the emissions, how the emissions need to be decarbonized in time, you can combine this and develop a integrated target. We're going to go in talk about an example now. So one of the reasons why I'm extremely excited about having this presentation today together with the Gobi team is that they've modeled the sectoral decarbonization approach in their software. So what you see here is the exact same model I was just showing from IEA. And maybe to provide a little bit more context, there are about 10 to 15 sectors in here. And if you look at 2015 emissions, you can see what the global emissions are sector by sector. And then towards the future, all the way up until 2050, this model provides guidance to what extent your activities in all these sectors would need to be decarbonized. And I did want to make this a little bit more concrete because many of the organizations joining today, they have real estate portfolios. There's one scenario in here called service buildings. It's a smaller one, the lower part of the figure, so you don't see it in detail in this model. But the one thing I wanted to highlight is that there is a decarbonization pathway, a specific decarbonization pathway for this sector. And this is one of the decarbonization pathways in order to develop your science-based target for your real estate portfolio. But when you have activities in other industries like aluminum, cement, can be chemicals, but also iron and steel, and a very important one is power generation. This model also provides the opportunity to assess to what extent your activities need to be decarbonized. And if we go to the next slide. So what you see here is a simplified actual example of how this works. So the line in blue, and here we've assumed that we're working on an intensity goal. So that means emissions per square foot or square meters for some international organizations. What you see here is a decarbonization pathway for a single organization. And then also the line in red shows the current emissions of the organization, and in this case, to what extent the organization needs to decarbonize in order to achieve a goal in 2050. You may see that this line is less steep than the decarbonization pathways we were just showing in the figure. And the reason is that we also correct for business growth. So if a real estate portfolio grows, then there's an opportunity to correct for that growth. And we've done that in this model, and that leads to decarbonization pathway that's not steep, for instance, on an absolute level, but can be quite steep from an intensity level, so emissions per square foot or square meter. And then if we go to the next slide. So a lot of the work we've been doing with our clients, over 50 to date, and usually that includes work on real estate portfolios, is not only developing a business as usual scenario for a company and showing to what extent the emissions of a company need to be decarbonized towards 2050, but also looking at how a portfolio investment plan related to energy and climate can be developed. And that's what you see here in the line in red, that companies develop not only these pathways, but also abatement plans, investment plans. And the main reason why we started doing this type of work a lot is that besides having a target, management and the C-suite usually also wants a answer to the question how to achieve a science-based target, how to achieve a target before committing to any target. So one thing I wanted to point out today is that Navigant and a group of NGOs, including the 2 Degrees Investment Initiative and the same group of NGOs was talking about earlier, WWF, World Resources Institute, and CDP and the Global Compact are currently developing guidance for financial organizations. And the reason why we're doing it is that if you look at a real estate or any investment portfolio, there wasn't guidance on how to develop a science-based target. The way I was just talking about it just now provides a way to do it, but this group is now developing more detailed guidance on the development of science-based targets, and that can include mortgages, real estate portfolios, any equity or debt, and several methodologies have been used and are available in order to develop targets, but this group is developing sector guidance in line with that, for instance, transportation sector guidance has been developed. So if you have any questions about that initiative or want to be part of that initiative, you can reach out to me and I can provide more information about that. Yeah, and then a bit more information about how to set a science-based target, and this may be very much in line with activities you've already been performing. This is also has always been the intention of the NGOs and partners involved. So the starting point is to develop a greenhouse gas inventory, usually in line with the requirements of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and also CDP. Then the next step is to allocate these emissions to your organizational activities for you to be able to match these activities with the sectoral decarbonization pathways I've been talking about. The next step is to, and that second step, you see that this mapping is not only for your scope 1 and 2 emissions, so the emissions within your own organization's boundaries, but also the emissions in your value chain, and actually for any financial organizations, this can be in the scope 3 category investments. And then once you've developed decarbonization pathways, and there's a calculation tool available for that online, you can develop an integrated target, and that's what companies usually communicate on the website of the Science Based Targets Initiative, and also in their CDP reporting. And yeah, then I was already talking about that answering the question how to achieve your target. It's also an important question, and the topics of energy efficiency and renewable energy are very important related to that. And I also do think that especially energy efficiency is providing many more opportunities for investments also by financial organizations. So it may be next to investing in renewable energy, which has been big, that there are more opportunities for investing in energy efficiency in your portfolio, potentially even developing and offering financial products to companies, may be a big opportunity for growth. Yeah, and then I wanted to conclude my part of the presentation with talking about a few of the reasons why we see companies doing this. It is very exciting that you're joining today, so hopefully that means that there's an interest in the topic. Having worked in this field now, specifically the science-based targets field, for the past 5 years, what we see is that some companies, they want to increase the credibility of their sustainability program and their product. I think the communication McDonald's has done on that is a great example. By just Googling what they do, you will see a lot of press releases on that. Another reason is demonstrating leadership, and because this topic is moving more and more to the C-suite, I've also talked to several leaders in organizations that say that it's important for them to have a sustainability and climate strategy, because when they want to hire top talent, they want to make sure that, or actually the people applying for a job as a company, if there is a program and if they can contribute. So it's can be one of the selection criteria for people to join a company. Then can be simply the reason to outperform sector peers. In the past, we've been seeing that a lot in benchmarking for cap and trade, greenhouse gas cap and trade systems. We also see companies doing that. I've worked with a large pharmaceutical company that really wanted to make sure that they had the most ambitious climate and energy program, and they've been investing in that a lot. Also, steering investments and driving innovation can be an important reason. This is related to what I talked about, that once you develop a target, answering the question, how are we going to achieve the target, is an important question. We've been working, for instance, with Vistaprint and Simpress. They developed a investment program based on or related to their target, and that's actually something they discuss internally up until board level. Saving money can be an important reason. Payback times, especially for energy efficiency, but increasingly also for renewable energy investments, can be really short. And also obtaining insight in sector transformations can be really interesting. If you, for instance, have investments in the energy sectors, oil and gas sector, these can be transforming a lot. And recently we also did a lot of work with General Motors on their target. And the automotive target is changing a lot. So thinking about the target, but then also how new propositions can change a market and also a company's activities is something that can be related to this context. And this is the moment that I'll hand over.
Great. Thanks for all that information. It's really interesting. So how does this all translate to your overall ESG goals and reporting frameworks? I'll be giving a brief overview on the ways in which implementing science-based targets in your ESG roadmap will benefit your long-term ESG strategy and environmental metrics reporting. So this is what I was saying earlier, to start kind of integrating science-based targets into your ESG strategy increases the credibility of your targets and builds reputation for your ESG program with a required public commitment. Setting science-based targets and getting them approved also solidifies your organization as a leader in climate risk and mitigation strategy. By becoming a leader in the climate risk mitigation strategies, your organization also has an opportunity to stay ahead of the curve on implementing policies that prepare you for the future low carbon-based economy. Science-based targets are an ambitious step in that direction. By pursuing ambitious science-based targets, your organization will drive innovation throughout your operations and value chain. This increased efficiency from innovation of your operations will lead to overall cost savings, which lead to a competitive advantage in the market. Science-based targets make your organization stand out to the crowd, and increasing number of investors demand robust long-term climate strategy. This forward-looking approach to setting medium and long-term targets that are validated by the Science-Based Target Initiative increases investor confidence in your reporting. An important cornerstone of any ESG program is the public disclosures that your organization reports to on an annual basis. I'm going to briefly touch on how some of these science-based targets can enhance your ESG reporting in frameworks such as CDP, GRESB, or WECO-SAM. I would say reporting as your targets as science-based in your public reporting to CDP, GRESB, or WECO-SAM increases the confidence of your investors and key stakeholders, your organization a leader in a peer group or specific business sector. Reporting entities also weight science-based targets higher than other target methodologies. For those submitting to CDP on August 15th, 3 leadership points are available for organizations that have aligned their targets with science-based methodology. To achieve these 3 points, you must ensure your reporting boundary includes 95% or greater emissions in scope for scope 1 and 2, report both medium and long-term science-based targets, and your emission reductions must meet a 2.1% decrease year over year from the base year to the target year. For those who submitted WECO-SAM a few weeks back, science-based targets are integrated into the climate strategy and climate-related target section of the assessment. These full points are possible on this section if your organization has a target based on a science-based target methodology. GRESB also aligns with the TCFD's recommendations and awards points for externally communicating your targets. Science-based targets are a great way of communicating your GHG reduction goals to external stakeholders. Organizations must complete a Scope 3 screening to have their targets approved by Science-Based Target Initiative. Once you have completed the screening, an organization must report a Scope 3 target if Scope 3 represents 40% or greater of your total GHG inventory. If you cross this 40% threshold, you should report at least 2/3 of your organization's Scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions open up organizations' upstream and downstream impact. This gives a great overview of an organization's overall impact throughout the value chain. Completing a Scope 3 assessment also helps identify areas of opportunity of improvements with suppliers and third-party vendors to decrease overall impact, and even influence other organizations to adopt more sustainable business practices themselves. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for listening. I think we'll go on to QA now. We'll go to the audience for some QA. So the first question we have here is, what are the biggest challenges for someone making the first steps toward doing Science-Based Targets Initiative? What are what are the roadblocks that's in?
Yeah, so what we've been seeing a lot in the last years is that companies usually have a scope 1 and 2 emissions inventory, and that if they don't have a value chain or a scope 3 screening yet, that's kind of an initial hurdle to take. And that's related to what you were just talking about for developing one of the value chain, or for developing the value chain part of your target. There have been a lot of, there are best practices in this field. Recently written a blog about this to be found in my LinkedIn profile with CDP on how you can develop a value chain target. And in general, we see that companies are becoming more and more efficient in developing a value chain inventory and also then a related target. And a scope 3 target can be a absolute target in line with the targets we see for scope 1 and 2 emissions. It can be an intensity target, preferably aligned with an sectoral decarbonization approach target, or it can be a supplier engagement target in which you will ask your suppliers to set a science-based target themselves. And actually, that major brands are currently setting such supplier engagement targets leads that throughout the supply chain, so deeper into the supply chain, increasingly deeper into the supply chain, more and more companies are committing to a target in line with the guidance of the Science-Based Targets Initiative.
So what is the timeline on this from start to finish? If you decide this is your organization wants to do, to when you're publicly committed to disclosing it externally?
So we usually see that when a company gives this extremely high priority, that a timeline of 3 months is maybe on the fast side of developing a target, and then usually another 1 or 2 months need to be taken into account in order to get a target approved. At the same time, we've been working with companies with complex value chains for periods from ranging from half a year to a year and a half in order to develop a target. So the more complex the value chain and the footprint, usually the longer it takes to develop a target. And I would say that when it has a higher priority, a timeline of 3 to 6 months for developing a target is what we've been seeing most.
So what are the kind of key stakeholders within your organization that you want to work with to kind of make this a reality within your organization?
Yeah, so probably for the scope 1 and 2 emissions, most people on the line have an idea on that, but it's really related to your energy management system and people with either access to your utility bills, fuel bills, and then kind of your data suppliers within the organization for your scope 1 and 2 emissions. And for the development of value chain targets, it depends a little bit organization by organization, but there are a couple of teams we interact with a lot. One team is a procurement team for companies that are either in manufacturing, heavy industry, but also manufacturing or processing of food. And technology manufacturing, the procurement team is really important. Usually the logistics team, so your coworkers working on the logistics topic are usually important. And then there are maybe a couple of categories like business travel and commuting, where either a travel agent or an HR department can be of help. And then when we're talking about real estate portfolios or investment portfolios, it can be the investment managers, anyone who knows where in the economy or where you invest your money. So the answer is it depends a little bit sector by sector and organization by organization, but these are a couple of the examples of people we see kind of engaging in the science-based targets and also the carbon footprinting process.
So what if you fall short of your goals, your target reduction? You publicly disclosed it, and now you're committed to it. What happens if you fall short of your goals?
Yeah, so we saw most commitments coming in starting 3 years ago. Some companies committed to the development of a science-based target and didn't follow through. So the initiative only positively communicates on companies with a science-based target, meaning if you commit to a science-based target, you'll be listed on the website. And then if you don't have a approved science-based target within 2 years, you will simply not be listed on the website anymore. So the Science-Based Targets Initiative does not communicate in any negative way on that. And then if you don't achieve your target, there hasn't been, because the initiative is relatively young, and the first targets were mostly set by 2020, and the targets that are being developed now are being set for 2025 and 2030 mostly. There have not been companies that actually hit their science-based target year yet. So there are no examples of companies not realizing their target and that there has been any communications on that. But I think it will simply be a similar way of communicating on that by the initiative, that it's that there's an opportunity to set a new target in line with climate science, and then you would need to try to achieve that target. And most companies we've been working with, they generally achieve their target, or when they're not achieving the target, it's a huge incentive for steering towards achieving the target, because it's a public commitment. Investors are looking at this, so it has actually, in some instances, been a major reason for our clients to invest more in the energy efficiency and renewable energy topic.
Great. So, given that Scope 1 and Scope 2 for a lot of the real estate clients on the line, that's mostly where their income comes from. Would you say that Scope 3 really isn't a barrier for most real estate firms?
Yeah, so if Scope 1 and 2 emissions, so if the real estate portfolio is owned, it would be Scope 1 and 2 emissions. But if you're an investment manager, it might be that you manage a real estate portfolio, and then it might be part of a Scope 3 inventory investments. I would say that it doesn't really matter, because what you're managing or what you're investing in is that real estate portfolio. And if you're committing to a science-based target, you are probably committed to achieving your target, and will probably invest in achieving that target. So from a methodology perspective, it may be either Scope 1 and 2 emissions or Scope 3 emissions, and then in reality, it might be either working with your own organization and investing, or working with a manager of your real estate portfolio to make it happen.
Great. Do these Scope 1 and 2 targets, when you make your science-based target, are these other factors, how many other factors are in play into the target? So say a power plant cuts down on their energy in transition to more renewable.
Yeah.
Is that all factored in, and how is that factored in?
Yeah. So when you develop your greenhouse gas inventory, usually do that with emission factors. That means that you look at your energy use, for instance, electricity. And when you procure power in markets that are being decarbonized, for instance, because the power production is being shifted more from coal to gas, or even more from gas to renewables. In time, that will mean that there will be less emissions per kilowatt hour. And that means that in time, if the power sector decarbonizes, that automatically you will have lower carbon emissions, and that you're automatically also achieving part of your science-based target. And this is something. So if a company has emissions through their the end use of their sold product, for instance, electronics. This is really relevant for electronics manufacturers. Part can be achieved by making the appliances or the equipment more efficient, and part of the emission reductions will be achieved because the emissions from the electricity used by products will be decarbonized because of grid decarbonization. And actually, in the modeling for the sectoral decarbonization approach, we do usually assume that there will be grid decarbonization. And these initiatives I was talking about, like RE100 and REBA, they also provide a lot of guidance and supporting materials in how you can realize more and more renewable energy. And one note is that RECs, so renewable energy credits in North America, are allowed to achieve your science-based targets, and also power purchase agreements, and also any on-site renewables. And the renewable energy strategies that are being developed by companies and investors usually take into account all these topics. Maybe at first a mix of procuring renewable energy and RECs, and then in time moving as much as possible as or to implementation of renewable energy for your sites.
So how often do you reassess your targets? Is it on a yearly, like every 4 years, 5 years? What is the recommendation for reassessing?
So if there are major acquisitions, that can be a moment to reassess your target. We do see that some companies indeed every 2 or 3 year reassess the target because they just want to see if they're on track. So we're working with a group of companies who initially committed to a science-based target about 2 or 3 years ago, and they are updating their target at the moment. And then there will be the moment that your target expires, when you may also want to update your target. And then one note is that companies are currently mostly setting targets for 2025 and 2030. The reason is that your target needs to be out between 5 and 15 years from the moment that you communicate your target.
We do have a question. Will this be recorded, and where can I find it? An email will be sent out to everyone who signed up, and you can view it on the website also at gobiinc.com/learn. So you can revisit this webinar at any time and review what Vince and I went over. So I think those are all the questions we had from the audience. Thank you so much for your time. On behalf of Navigant and Gobi, thank you for sharing all your time with us and learning about science-based targets. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me or Vincent and visit our websites to check out what we're doing around science-based targets. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.